Hello friends, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing some sewing. My friend Stacy gave me this quilt kit and I just think that it's so beautiful. She was cleaning out a cupboard and decided that she didn't need it anymore and asked me if I would like it, and I said that I would. The thing that Stacy didn't know at the time was that we had just found out a week before this that my daughter was pregnant. At this time, we don't know what sex the baby is, and this is definitely more of a feminine, has more of a feminine vibe to it. And I'm not even sure if this is a baby size or a lap size, if it's too big to be a baby quilt or not. But I'm going to make it up and we'll just see what happens. I'm a little intimidated because I've never made a quilt before using written instructions. The instructions call for some of the pieces to be cut on the bias, and that makes me a little bit nervous as well. So we'll see how this goes. I went ahead and made squares and rectangles out of the plaid fabric, and then I made larger squares out of the pastel green fabric. And since this was a purchased kit, I don't really feel good about sharing the dimensions with you on this video. But I will try to find a similar pattern on a YouTube tutorial and link that tutorial in the description box. Here I'm making triangles out of a square, 4 of them. I saw on a social media page for quilting that if you are cutting fabric on the bias, that you should spray it with spray starch first. And I didn't know that until I had already cut out some of the triangle pieces. So I am going to attempt to spray and iron on some starch on them now. And I just put down this paper bag. I cut it open and just put this down to protect my ironing board cover from all of the starch. But just a word of warning, if you use a bag that has a handle on it, it has glue on it to connect the handle to the bag, and if you put the hot iron on it, it will stick to your ironing board. So it worked out pretty good doing it this way. Doing it on the, see, that's what I was talking about. But doing it on the paper kind of made it not very flat. And so I'm just going over it afterwards just on the ironing board cover so that it has a better appearance. So I just remedied that situation by folding it underneath so that it would not stick to the ironing board. So I went ahead and did all of the pieces that I had already cut out, and then I also did the pieces of fabric that I hadn't cut out yet. And it was probably unnecessary to spray starch the pieces that weren't cut on the bias, the square pieces, but I did it anyway. I'm back at the cutting mat now and cutting out squares out of the yellow and then cutting them diagonally twice into quarter square triangles. Now I'm cutting quarter square triangles out of larger squares of the aqua swirly fabric. So if you're keeping track, the pink and the yellow and the aqua swirly fabric are all the same dimension and all cut into quarter square triangles. And then cutting smaller squares and half square triangles out of those out of the aqua swirly fabric. And these are the triangles that I'll use with the larger pink triangles to make the flying geese blocks. Some of these are less than perfect. And here are my cut pieces all ready to go. I'm going to lay everything out on my mat. I only have enough room to do 3 rows at a time, but I think that will help me be better organized at what to sew first. I'm going to start out by sewing the quarter triangle square. So I grabbed a pink triangle and the aqua swirly fabric triangle, and I am going to sew those together with right sides facing each other. I learned something important by doing this first one. I'm starting at the square edge of the triangle, which causes me to end up at the narrow pointy end. And when I end at the narrow pointy end, it always veers to the right and makes the seam uneven. So I found if I started at the narrow pointy end and ended at the square edge, I had a lot better control over the width of my seam. So that's what I did from the second one on to the last one. So here's what they look like. And I like to give those a good finger press after I've sewn them. And voila. I'm ready now to sew these 2 pieces together to make my quarter square triangle block. You'll notice that I have the seam allowance on each piece going a different way, so that when they meet up together, it's going to be more of a flat seam, and I'm going to have less bulk from fabric. You need to butt the 2 seams up very tightly together so that you have a very clean intersection once you're done sewing it. I put a pin in that seam to secure it, and now I am just sewing the seam 1/4 inch, taking the pin out when I come to it, and there I'll have my quarter square triangle block. And when I or anyone else refers to nesting your seams, this is what they're talking about. The YouTube videos that I'll have linked in the description box will show a different way to make quarter square triangles. I'm just doing it the way the pattern for this kit is telling me how to do it. And voila! A seam intersection doesn't get any prettier than this. And this is the progress I'm making on the first 3 rows. Now I'm starting to sew blocks together, so I have the plaid rectangle and a quarter square triangle that I've sewed together. To that, I'm sewing on the larger light green square. Now I have all the pieces of the 3rd row sewn together. And if I'm being honest, the flying geese block kind of scares me, so I haven't started that one yet. I didn't square up any of these quarter square triangle blocks, and I should have. So don't be like me. Go ahead and take the time and square them up so that they fit better they just fit together better. This is not going to be a perfect looking quilt. And I'm okay with that because I don't want to take apart all the pieces that I've sewn together already. but I'm just saying take the time to square up your blocks. This was my first attempt at making a flying geese block with this method, and to say it was a failure is an understatement. And I really didn't know what I was doing, so I went on YouTube and watched a few videos on how to do it this way. And my next try turned out a whole lot better than this one. So what I'm doing here is matching up the largest side of the smaller triangle to one of the slants of the pink triangle, making sure that the bottom edges are flush with one another. And so then I'm going to sew a seam on the right side, and then I'll open it up and show you what it looks like. At the end, it did that veering to the right thing that I told you about before. The needle veered to the right and made it so that it wasn't a straight seam. So I just went back and went over it. So here's what it looks like. And so now I'm going to do the other side. After I either press it open or finger press it really well, pressing the seam allowance to the smaller triangle side. So the only other time that I've made flying geese was when I made the quilt with all the little houses on it. And you can look on my playlist for that, the mini house quilt. And I'm thinking that I like this method better. I used a different method for that, but I'm thinking that I like this one better. It definitely has less fabric waste with it. So that part's good too. And this looks pretty good. I'm pretty pleased with this. So now just sewing on the flying geese block onto the light green plain block piece of fabric and knocking out another row of this quilt. The first 3 rows are done now. Now I'm to the point where I can start sewing the rows together. I like to start nesting the seams in the middle of the row and work outward. I will nest 2 seams and then go to the middle of the 2 blocks and ease the material together so that it matches up. And pin it a couple of times. And then once I've done the whole 2 rows together like that, then I will sew them together. I found a few videos on the Ohio Star pattern that I think might be helpful, and so I will link those in the description box. One is from Jordan Fabrics, and they said on the video that if you go to their website, there is a free pattern for the Ohio Star quilt block that you can copy off from their website, and it's called the Stars and Four Patches pattern. And now to sew these two rows together. I laid out the next 4 rows on my cutting mat. Because of mistakes and miscalculations in pieces, I need to cut out 2 more yellow triangles and 2 more pink triangles. Here we have the blocks of the second half of the quilt sewed into rows. And now all the sections and rows of the quilt have been sewed together and pressed really nicely. This part looks really bad even after ironing, and so I don't know how I'm going to fix it, but I am going to attempt to pick out a few of the seams to try and fix it, make it look a little better. I've outlined the Ohio star pattern here. Since it's so large, it's a little hard to tell what quilt pattern this is, so I've outlined it for you. The instructions call for a 4-inch border around the top that I just made, and so I am going to cut out 4.5-inch wide strips. This fabric series is called Zany for Zinnias. It's by Jennifer Sampson for Robert Kaufman Fabrics. Because the fabric was longer than my cutting mat, I've got it at an angle here, and I'm just using my long straight edge to cut 4.5-inch strips. I had debated with myself whether I should use this as the border or get a different fabric from the fabric store, either a hot pink or a pastel green to use as the border, and then use this fabric that came in the kit as the backing, because there wasn't enough for the border and the backing. But there still was an awful lot left over, so it felt kind of like a waste in a way. But I may have enough of that to make the binding. I'll just have to look and see. But I think in the next day or so, I will make a trip to the fabric store to buy some fabric to go on the back. I think that will be for another video. I think I'm going to sew this border on and fix that one block and press it up really nice, and then that will be the end of this video. I ripped out the stitching to part of the side seam and then the top seam for 2 blocks on that one block that didn't look very good. And so now I am just sewing it back together. I am taking a little bit in on the side seam and then sewing the top back together. I probably could have taken it in a little bit more, but I didn't want to mess with it too much and totally ruin the fabric. This video has been in the making for about 3 months, and we're hoping to find out the gender of our grandchild in about a week. And the plan right now is to finish this quilt whether we're having a granddaughter or a grandson. And here it is after being repaired. I think it looks better. It's not perfect. There are a lot of imperfections in this quilt, but I am not an advanced quilter, so I'm okay with it. Right now, I'm pinning the 4-inch wide strips that I cut for the border onto the sides of the quilt. And then after that, I will sew them on. As I'm pinning, when I come to the flying geese blocks, I try to put the pin in so that it will go through the point of the top of the flying geese, of the top of the triangle there, so that I know when I'm sewing it where it is, so that I don't cut it off. I did about half and half on this one. I cut off some of them, but some of them are beautiful, so there you go. I sewed the borders onto both sides, and then I trimmed the hangover pieces off. And then I sewed the top and bottom border on. And when I was done doing that, I trimmed them up as well. So here is the finished quilt top. It measures 38.5 by 53.5 inches. What I need to do next is get a backing and some batting, and then put this top on top of that. I'll need to quilt it or stitch it somehow, either by hand or by machine. I'm thinking that I'll stitch in the ditch vertically and horizontally and diagonally, and then hand stitch some hearts into the light green squares. I'll need to make some binding and then bind the quilt by machine, and then I stitch it by hand. And that will all be in another video, so be looking for that to come out soon. So thank you for joining me as I made the Ohio Star baby quilt. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.